When we reach our 70s, we naturally start to reflect on life. Family often plays a crucial role in that reflection, serving as a source of comfort, support, and connection. However, as we grow older, it's essential to be cautious with some relatives. While family is meant to be a source of love and encouragement, certain behaviors and patterns can be detrimental to our well-being, especially when we are in our 70s. Over the years, I've seen many individuals in their 70s struggle because they didn't recognize the subtle warning signs in their relationships with family members. So, let's explore 5 key behaviors to be cautious of in relatives when you enter your 70s. The first sign to be cautious of is when a relative is constantly pressuring you for money or resources. At this stage in life, most people are on a fixed income. Some of us may have retired, and others may be living on savings and pensions. Yet, there are always relatives who seem to think that you have unlimited funds, and they might subtly or overtly pressure you for financial assistance. This type of relative tends to show up when you're vulnerable, especially when you're dealing with health issues or loss. They may present themselves as being overly concerned about your well-being, but in reality, their interest lies in what you can provide for them. One of the most significant dangers of this is that you may feel guilty for saying no, particularly if they've been part of your life for many years. You might even start to question if you're being selfish or unreasonable for not offering financial help. To put this into perspective, let's take a look at a case study. I recall a family member, a woman in her 70s named Anne, who had spent her life working hard and building a modest savings. She had always been generous with her resources, but when she entered her 70s, her niece, Laura, began to frequently ask for money. At first, Anne didn't mind. She gave Laura a few $100s here and there, feeling that it was just part of being family. But over time, the requests grew more frequent, and the amounts began to climb. Laura would send texts asking for money for unexpected medical bills or a family emergency. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was the emotional pressure. And started to feel like she had no choice but to help, even when it was clear that Laura's lifestyle choices were leading her to financial trouble. And felt conflicted. She wanted to be a good aunt, but she was also beginning to feel used. Eventually, Anne's health started to decline, and she realized that she needed to conserve her resources for her own future. She had to take a step back and set firm boundaries with Laura, and while it was difficult, and learned that prioritizing her own needs was not selfish. She had worked hard for her savings, and it was important to protect her financial security. The second red flag comes when a relative refuses to respect your personal boundaries. Everyone has their own way of handling their space and privacy. For some of us, in our 70s, this means needing more time to ourselves or wanting control over the decisions that impact our lives, particularly regarding healthcare or living arrangements. Unfortunately, there are relatives who see your boundaries as something to be pushed, whether it's about your space, decisions regarding your health, or how much personal time you need. A relative like this might constantly call, drop by uninvited, or make decisions for you without your input, believing that they know what's best for you. This lack of respect for personal boundaries can lead to stress and resentment, especially when you are at a stage in life where your health, mental well-being, and peace of mind should be your priority. I want to share the story of Mark, a man in his early 70s who had a daughter named Janet. Janet, in her 40s, had always been a well-meaning but somewhat overbearing presence in Mark's life. Mark lived alone, and while he appreciated the occasional visit from his daughter, she began to impose herself more and more. Janet would stop by unannounced, criticize the way Mark was managing his finances, and often made decisions about his health care without asking him first. She would schedule doctor's appointments for him and even try to change his living situation without his consent, believing it was in his best interest. Mark had been independent all his life, and this constant invasion of his personal space and decisions started to take a toll on his emotional well-being. He felt like he had lost his autonomy. Eventually, Mark had to have a difficult conversation with Janet. He calmly explained that while he appreciated her concern, he needed space to make his own choices, especially when it came to his health. It wasn't an easy conversation, and it didn't happen overnight, but Janet eventually began to respect his boundaries. This story is a reminder that it's essential to assert your personal boundaries, no matter how much a relative may think they know what's best for you. The third behavior to be cautious of is when a relative becomes overly controlling. While it's natural for family members to want to be involved in your life, there's a fine line between caring and controlling. A relative who is overly controlling may try to dictate everything you do, from how you spend your time to who you interact with and even what you wear. This can become exhausting and diminish your sense of self. Control often comes from a place of fear or insecurity. Perhaps the relative fears losing you or feels threatened by your independence. While they may claim their actions are for your benefit, the reality is that they're trying to manipulate your life to fit their vision of what they believe is best for you. Take, for example, the story of Susan, a woman in her 70s who had an older brother named Henry. Henry, although much older than Susan, was always the more protective sibling. However, over the years, his protectiveness began to morph into control. Henry would visit Susan's home, rearrange her furniture, and make decisions for her about what kind of groceries to buy or what TV shows to watch. He would insist on driving her everywhere, even though she was fully capable of doing so herself. Susan began to feel like she was living under constant surveillance. It wasn't that Henry didn't love her, it was that he was so afraid of her facing any discomfort that he became excessively controlling. It took time for Susan to assert herself. She finally sat Henry down and explained that while she appreciated his help, she was still an adult who could make her own choices. The conversation was tough, but Susan found a way to reestablish her independence and restore a healthier dynamic with her brother. This story highlights the importance of asserting control over your own life and not letting a relative's well-meaning interference undermine your confidence and autonomy. Another crucial red flag in your 70s is when a relative only reaches out to you when they need something. This pattern is one of the most emotionally draining because it makes you feel like a resource rather than a loved one. These relatives only contact you when they want something, whether it's financial help, assistance with a task, or an emotional crutch to lean on. After the need is fulfilled, they disappear until the next time they require something from you. This kind of transactional relationship can leave you feeling unappreciated and emotionally drained. The worst part is that it often happens without you realizing it until you've given a lot of time, energy, and resources to someone who isn't reciprocating the love or care. Let's take the story of Frank, a retired teacher in his 70s who had a nephew named Lucas. Lucas would call Frank every few months, but only when he needed something. Sometimes it was a small favor, like helping with moving furniture, or other times it was larger, like requesting a loan to cover unexpected expenses. Frank, being the kind-hearted man he was, always agreed to help. But after a while, Frank began to notice that Lucas only called when there was a favor to ask. There were no calls to check in on him or share any news about Lucas's life. It was a one-sided relationship that drained Frank emotionally. Eventually, Frank realized that he was being used, and he made a conscious decision to stop fulfilling Lucas's requests. He had to accept that it wasn't wrong to say no, especially when the relationship felt unbalanced. Frank learned that family relationships should be about mutual care, not just one-sided giving. This is an important reminder that in your 70s, your time and energy should be spent with those who truly value you. Lastly, be cautious with relatives who manipulate you with guilt. Guilt tripping is a subtle yet powerful form of manipulation. Some relatives use guilt as a tool to get what they want, making you feel as though you owe them something or that you're not doing enough. Guilt tripping can make you feel inadequate or selfish for not meeting their expectations, even when you know deep down that you're doing your best. In your 70s, you've earned the right to prioritize your own needs and happiness, and anyone who tries to make you feel guilty for doing so is not acting in your best interest. Take the case of Margaret, a woman in her 70s who had a daughter named Rachel. Rachel had always been very demanding, and as Margaret got older, Rachel began to use guilt to control her decisions. "If you really loved me, you'd help me out," Rachel would say when asking for favors. Margaret felt pressured to comply, even when it wasn't convenient or in her best interest. Over time, Margaret realized that Rachel was emotionally manipulating her. Margaret had to confront her daughter and explain that while she loved her, she needed to stop using guilt to get her way. It was a difficult conversation, but Margaret learned that she didn't owe anyone her happiness or well-being. As you enter your 70s, be mindful of these 5 behaviors. While family is an essential part of life, it's crucial to protect your emotional and financial well-being. Recognizing these signs early on can help you avoid unhealthy dynamics and ensure that your relationships are based on mutual respect and love. You've earned the right to live your life on your own terms, and anyone who doesn't respect that is someone you need to distance yourself from. Be careful, set boundaries, and prioritize your well-being, because at the end of the day, you deserve to live the rest of your life in peace and happiness.